If Evelyn disappeared tomorrow, would anyone even notice?
Laughed.
Not hat was the exact second
What happens when
I didn't leave to teach anyone a lesson. I left to remember who I was before I shrank to fit into their world. For years, I smiled through passive-aggressive jabs, baked their favorite desserts, sent thoughtful cards, and dressed the part, never too flashy, never too loud. All for what? To be someone's punch. The silence after I left was louder than anything they ever said to my face. My phone didn't ring. No apology came. No one begged me to come home. It turns out Linda was right. If I disappeared, they didn't notice. But that gave me something I never expected. FR. On the Oregon coast. In a weathered little guest house run by my childhood best friend, I started again. I pulled my sketchbooks out of storage, picked up watercolor brushes, and began drawing for the joy of it. Just for me. No approval needed. And then one small job led to another, until the day I found myself being hired as the lead designer for a national eco-in campaign. 1 year later, I walked into their corporate gala, not as someone's wife, but as the woman whose work now represented the face of their biggest rebrand in years. Funny how things turn out. The drive back home after that party was quiet, eerily quiet. Peter kept checking his phone, muttering about emails and flight details for some upcoming business trip. I stared out the window, replaying the laughter, the way Linda's voice sliced through the air like it was a joke worth clapping for. If Evelyn disappeared tomorrow, I heard it again and again, like a looped recording burned into my chest. He didn't even ask if I was okay. Not once. Just sat there like it hadn't happened, like I wasn't sitting beside him unraveling in real time. That's when I knew. Not just that I needed to go, but that no one was going to save me but me. When we got home, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I folded laundry. I fed the dog. I looked around at the house I had decorated, the kitchen I had baked birthday cakes in, the garden I had planted one rose bush at a time. Then I opened the drawer where we kept the passports, took mine out, and quietly began making plans. By 2 a.m., I had booked a long-term rental near the Oregon coast. Quiet, off-grid, nothing fancy. Just ocean air and peace. At 6:17 a.m., Peter left for his golf game without saying goodbye. By 8 o'clock, I was gone. I didn't tell anyone, not even my sister. I needed time. Time to think,
to feel,
to finally hear my own thoughts without the constant noise of what I should be, should wear, should say to keep the peace. And here's the part no one expects. I didn't feel scared. I felt alive. I spent the first week watching the tide roll in and out like it was some kind of sermon. The silence healed me more than any apology ever could. Then one morning I pulled out my sketch pad, and something in me clicked. The colors, the shapes, the ideas, they flowed out like they'd been waiting years for space. What they didn't know when I walked out that door was that I wasn't disappearing. I was reappearing as the version of myself they never cared to meet. And in time, the world would meet her too. It started with a menu board. A tiny cafe 2 blocks from my rental had these chalk-scrawled specials that were barely legible. One morning, I complimented the owner on her coffee, and she sighed. Now, if only someone could fix my menu before people start ordering alphabet soup. I laughed and offered to help. I didn't tell her about my degrees or my years of experience. I just showed up the next morning with a sketch and an idea. 2 weeks later, that same cafe referred me to a bookstore. The bookstore led to a bed and breakfast. And somehow, one thing snowballed into another until I found myself on a Zoom call with a design agency in Portland, reviewing mock-ups for a national rebrand of an eco-in chain. They loved my concepts. They offered me the job. And just like that, without a fancy title or anyone's permission, I was back in the game, on my terms this time. It wasn't until I read the project brief in full that I noticed the parent company, Granger Properties, my ex-husband's family business. The very people who laughed as I was quietly erased from their lives. I stared at the name for a full minute, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with something else. Power, maybe. A strange sense of fate folding in on itself. Could I really do this? Work for them, widow. I almost backed out. Almost.
But then I thought of that party.
Of Linda's voice. Of Peter's silence. Of every time I swallowed my thoughts just to keep the peace. And suddenly I knew I wasn't afraid of being seen anymore. I wasn't there to prove anything. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was simply ready. So, I signed the contract. I rolled up my sleeves. And I put everything I had into that campaign. Every color, every font choice. Every brushstroke was a quiet reclaiming of my voice. What I didn't expect, what I couldn't have predicted, was that they'd ask me to attend the launch gala. In person. As the featured designer. And suddenly, the woman who once slipped away in silence was about to walk back in, under her own name, in her own power, and with absolutely nothing left to prove. The night of the gala, I stood in front of the hotel mirror, staring at a version of myself I hadn't seen in decades. My hair, once long and always tucked behind my ears like Peter liked, was now cut into a sharp, elegant bob. The emerald green jumpsuit I wore hugged me in all the right places, bold without being flashy. My lipstick was darker than I used to dare. I didn't look like someone's wife or someone's afterthought. I looked like a woman who had something to say and wasn't afraid to be heard anymore. I walked into that ballroom alone, heels clicking across marble like a drum roll. The space buzzed with conversation and champagne. Designers, executives, journalists. And then I saw them, the Grangers, standing beneath a crystal chandelier like a living oil painting. Richard holding court. Patricia smiling that perfected social smile. Linda, flawless and cold as ever. And Peter, standing just behind them, glass in hand, looking around the room like he was bored with it all. Until his eyes found mine. He froze. Just for a moment. Then blinked like he wasn't sure if he was seeing a ghost or a reckoning. I didn't flinch.
I didn't wave.
I simply turned to the creative director by my side and asked, "Shall we?" And we made our way to the front of the room, where the presentation would begin. When my name was announced as the lead designer behind the rebrand, I stepped forward, took the mic, and delivered my presentation with clarity, confidence, and purpose. I talked about storytelling through visuals, about capturing emotion in design. I spoke like someone who had found her voice and knew its worth. And in the front row, Peter watched me. Not with mockery. Not with pity. With something that looked an awful lot like regret. Afterward, people came up to shake my hand, ask for business cards, compliment the campaign. A few feet away, the Grangers huddled, silent for once. I wasn't there to impress them. I wasn't there to show off. I was there because I belonged. And as I left that ballroom later that night, I didn't look back, not once. Some doors don't need to be closed with a bang. Sometimes, the click of your heels walking away is loud enough. The morning after the gala, I woke up in my hotel room to sunlight pouring through the curtains like a quiet triumph. No nerves. No regrets. Just calm. I made myself a cup of coffee, black and bold, and stood barefoot by the window overlooking the city. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just visiting my life anymore. I was living it fully, freely, and without apology. Later that afternoon, I attended the second day of the marketing summit. It was more low-key than the gala, with breakout sessions and workshops. But just as important for networking. I was scheduled to speak on integrating personal storytelling into branding, something I knew intimately now. When I stepped onto the stage, I didn't just present a concept. I told my story through visuals, tone, and presence. I watched executives nod. I saw younger designers scribbling notes. And in the back of the room, I saw Peter again, standing alone this time. After the session, he approached me slowly, like someone walking across ice they weren't sure would hold. "You look good, Evelyn," he said. Hands in his pockets, voice softer than I remembered. Stronger. "I am," I replied. He paused, eyes searching mine. I didn't get it back then, but I do now. I should have said something that night, when Linda made that comment. I should have stood up for you. I studied his face, the man I once loved, once protected, once begged silently to see me. "Yes," I said gently. "You should have." We talked for a few minutes, not about blame or guilt, just about what was. About how quiet neglect can bruise deeper than loud betrayal. And then, without any bitterness, I told him the truth. I wasn't angry anymore. I had found something better than anger. Peace. When we said goodbye, there was no promise to reconnect. No what if hanging in the air. Just a simple nod from two people who had shared a long chapter and were finally closing the book. That evening, as I packed my things and zipped my suitcase shut, I smiled. Not because I'd proven anything to them, but because I had finally proven something to myself. I could walk away. I could come back. And either way, I would still be whole. It was funny, in a strange and bittersweet way, how the moment you stop needing validation is the exact moment it tries to find you. A few weeks after the summit, I received an email from Granger Properties. Polite. Professional. Cold. They wanted to explore future creative collaborations after the success of the Sheffield campaign. No mention of the past. No mention of me walking away from their son or their legacy. Just a business opportunity, like none of it ever happened. I sat with the email for a full hour before responding. "Thank you for your interest," I wrote. At this time, my studio is focused on projects aligned with authentic storytelling and community growth. Wishing you continued success. I hit send, leaned back, and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Not from fear, but release. That used to be the dream, didn't it? To finally be invited in? But now that I was standing outside their world, I saw it clearly for what it was. Conditional acceptance dressed up as prestige. Around that same time, I closed on a small cottage just outside Cannon Beach. Nothing grand, just 2 bedrooms, a sun-drenched kitchen, and a worn wooden fence covered in ivy. It was mine. Bought with money I earned using my name, my art, and my voice. I painted the front door a bold cobalt blue, the kind of color I never would have dared when I lived in Peter's world, where everything had to match the HOA palette. And just like that, a new chapter began, not with fanfare or fireworks, but the soft rhythm of waves outside my window and the quiet hum of a kettle boiling on the stove. I started teaching watercolor workshops at the local library. I hosted a small art night at the cafe where it all began. I laughed more, slept better, and smiled at strangers without bracing for judgment. Sometimes when people ask what happened, I just say, I took the long way home, because that's what it was. A long, painful, beautiful road back to myself. And while they may never know what they lost when I walked away, I know exactly what I found when I did. Peace. And the kind of freedom you only earn when you stop asking for permission to exist. One crisp Saturday morning, I was arranging wildflowers in a chipped ceramic vase when my phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. "Hi, Evelyn. This is Charlotte, Michael's wife. I hope it's okay." I reached out. I was wondering if you'd be open to meeting for coffee. I stared at the screen, startled. Charlotte had always been quiet at family gatherings, a pediatrician with a calm presence and gentle smile. We'd never been close, but I remembered how she once slipped me a folded napkin at a Granger dinner that simply said, "I see you." Curiosity outweighed hesitation. And 2 days later we sat across from each other in a quiet corner of a seaside cafe. She looked relieved, maybe even grateful. After a few sips of coffee and some awkward small talk, she leaned in and said, "The family's not the same since you left. And honestly, that's not a bad thing." I blinked. She wasn't being dramatic, just honest. She told me Linda had finally hit a wall. She'd made a snide comment about Charlotte's parenting choices during brunch, and Peter, of all people, had pushed back. Apparently, my quiet exit had done more than raise eyebrows. It had cracked the illusion. People started asking questions. Not just about me, but about themselves. About what they tolerated. What they expected. What they'd ignored. "Amanda's in therapy," Charlotte added. "She's pregnant now, and she said something last week I never thought I'd hear. I don't want to raise a child who thinks love comes with conditions." I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt vindicated, another part stunned, and somewhere deeper, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in a while: compassion. "I guess your absence said more than your presence ever could," Charlotte said gently. I walked home slowly that day. The wind salty on my skin, my thoughts tangled. I hadn't left to change them. I'd left to save myself. But somehow, the silence I left behind had spoken louder than all my years of effort. It made me wonder. Maybe the real power wasn't in shouting to be seen, but in choosing to walk away when you're no longer willing to be invisible. And sometimes, just disappearing from the wrong places is what finally makes you impossible to ignore. It was just after sunrise when I pulled a weathered cardboard box down from the top shelf of my closet. Inside were the last of my old life: framed photos, love letters that once meant the world, and a jewelry box holding 2 rings. My wedding band and the engagement ring Peter had given me all those years ago. But there was another ring too, my grandmother's, the one she wore through a war, widowhood, and a life filled with grit and grace. That was the one I asked to keep in the divorce. Not the diamond from the Grangers. Not the symbol of a name I no longer wore. Just the one that reminded me of who I came from and who I was returning to. The final divorce paperwork had come through weeks earlier. Simple, clean, uncontested.
Peter didn't fight me on a thing.
No last-minute letters. No desperate calls. Just a short note through the attorney. "I still don't fully understand, but I respect your choice." Funny. After everything, those words landed with more weight than I expected. Not because I needed them, but because they showed he might finally be seeing me without needing me to shrink. With the papers signed and the past put to rest, I turned my focus forward. I had a house now. A home. One I paid for in full with my own earnings, painted in colors I chose. Filled with secondhand treasures that made my soul light up. I planted herbs in the windowsill. I adopted an old rescue dog with crooked ears and eyes that looked like he'd seen too much. I named him Charlie. He fit right in. I kept teaching art at the library, joined a community garden, and even started dating again. Nothing serious. Just gentle coffee shop conversations and late afternoon walks by the sea. For the first time in years, I laughed easily. Not out of politeness. Not to smooth things over. But because something inside me had finally unclenched. Sometimes people in town would ask where I came from. I'd smile and say, "A few lifetimes ago." Because that's what it felt like. Like I had lived many lives to arrive at this one. And somehow, in choosing myself, I had created a life that didn't need anyone's permission to feel like home. One breezy Thursday afternoon, I was hanging wind chimes on my front porch, something delicate I'd made from driftwood and sea glass, when Jessica pulled up in her beat-up Subaru, her arms already open for a hug before she even stepped out. She was the first person I had called when I left Peter. The one who helped me pack up my life in boxes and didn't ask questions, just showed up. Seeing her now, in this place I had built from the ashes, felt like completing a full circle. She stepped inside, looked around my little cottage with its mismatched rugs and bright kitchen curtains, and said with tears in her eyes, "You live like someone who knows who she is." That night, over wine and homemade stew, we sat by the fire and talked about everything, what I'd left behind, what I'd found, and what I never wanted to lose again. "You laugh differently now," she said suddenly, spoon halfway to her mouth. "It used to sound like you were checking for permission. Now it sounds like you're just laughing." That landed deeper than I expected, because it was true. Back then, I used to laugh in rooms that didn't welcome me. I'd dress the part, play nice, accept the small slights, just to be tolerated. Now I dressed in what made me feel alive. I filled my home with things that didn't match, but made me smile. I woke up without dread in my chest. Every part of this new life, this quiet, simple, deeply mine life, was built from choices I made without consulting anyone else. I didn't ask what Peter would think. I didn't wonder if Patricia would approve. And not once did I care whether Linda would laugh. The next morning, Jessica and I walked down to the beach with Charlie trotting ahead, his ears flopping like pages turning in the wind. We sat on a log, sipping coffee from thermoses, the tide slowly creeping in. "You think you'll ever go back?" she asked gently. I shook my head. "To that life?
No.
But I'll visit the memory sometimes, just to remind myself how far I've come. Because the greatest comeback isn't loud. It's steady. It's quiet. And it starts the moment you stop apologizing for taking up space." The last box I unpacked wasn't marked kitchen or office or art supplies. It simply said, "Someday." I had scribbled it on there in a hurry, back when I was still half scared, half exhausted, and completely unsure if this new life would stick. Inside were things I hadn't dared to face. An old journal, my first design portfolio, a photo of me at 30, standing in front of a gallery wall, eyes lit with ambition. Beneath it all, I found a note I'd written to myself the night I left Peter. It said, "If they don't see you, go where you shine." I read it 3 times, my breath catching on the last line. I hadn't realized it back then, but I had already made a promise to the woman I would become. That woman now stands with her feet firmly planted on the edge of the Pacific, teaching watercolor to retirees and wide-eyed teens in the community center on Thursdays. She hosts Sunday dinners with mismatched chairs and candles in jam jars. She paints not to impress, but to express. And when she laughs, it rolls through the house like music, whole, unfiltered, free. I don't check Peter's social media. I don't reread old emails. I don't wonder who took my seat at the table I once tried so hard to fit into. Because somewhere along the way, I stopped needing to belong where I was never valued in the first place. What they saw as a disappearance was really a return to myself. And the real surprise? No one had to lose for me to win. I didn't come back to settle scores. I came back because I had something better than revenge. I had peace, purpose, and a life where every corner reflected my own hands, my own choices, my own joy. So when people ask me what happened, I just smile and say, I lived. Because sometimes the most powerful comeback isn't loud or angry. It's quiet, soft-spoken, full of grace. And it begins the moment you stop waiting to be invited into someone else's story and start writing your own. If you've ever felt invisible, unheard, or underestimated, just know. You don't have to fight to be seen. You only have to stand where the light reaches you.